are in listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome to this Futuresource webinar. I'm James Edwards, and before I hand you over to my colleagues, I'd like to provide you with a brief introduction to this webinar and Futuresource Consulting. Your phones have been muted, so if you'd like to ask any questions at any time, please send them to us via your keyboard using the questions function at the right-hand side of your screen. If you can't see the questions pad, you'll see a small red arrow in the top right of your screen. If you click it, a panel will appear. Any questions will be noted, addressed and answered at the end of the presentation. We will also be releasing a cut-down version of the presentation to you all later in the week. Today we will be providing you with a review of education technology adoption in 2014 and the expectations in 2015. We're looking into the overall global spend levels on hardware in 2014, which types of products are gaining traction and which are dropping off. We'll take a deeper look into the market for interactive displays as well as one-to-one computing. We will then finish with a look at developments in the area of classroom collaboration. Your presenters for this session are my colleagues Mike Fisher and Colin Messenger. The presentation session will last around 40 minutes, then we'll go on to answer any questions you may have, aiming to wrap up in around an hour. As you may already know, Futuresource is a specialist research and consulting company with a history stretching back to the 1980s. We provide our clients with global market analysis in education technology, consumer and professional electronics, digital imaging, entertainment media, broadcast, content, storage, and we operate on a global scale. We have a dedicated education technology team which has been researching, tracking and consulting on the global education markets on a day-to-day basis for more than 15 years, analysing the market trends, technologies and products, vendors, applications and related services. Our first presenter today is Colin Messenger. Colin is one of our senior market analysts and has been with the company for almost 20 years, focusing on schools and education markets on a day-to-day basis. Our other presenter is Mike Fisher. Mike is the Associate Director of the Education team. Mike has been with Futuresource Consulting for nearly 15 years, now leading the Education Technology team and closely involved in researching, analysing and consulting on key industry developments worldwide with a particular focus on new and developing opportunities across education. Anyway, without further ado, let's delve into the detail. Colin, over to you.
Well, thank you, James, and good morning or good afternoon, everybody. Let me start with a chart from our recent annual Universal Education Spend report. And this report looks at all the main hardware products we track, which includes the mobile computers, the netbook, notebook, Chromebook and tablet, as well as the classroom displays, which is the interactive whiteboards, interactive flat panel, interactive projectors as well as normal projectors, and the complementary devices, visualizers, voting systems, lectern panels and voice amplification. So basically all the education technology products that you'd expect to associate with classrooms. The first thing to say is that 2014 was a really strong year. There's a growth of 16%, so an additional $2 billion up to $14.9 billion in the year. We've seen a real surge in government investments in EdTech around the world in 2014, with many new countries realizing the benefits of technology uses in education. Mike will show you later where some of these developments have occurred. We're seeing strong developments in one-to-one learning programs, which obviously is the driver for supplementary revenues for digital software and publishing solutions. One-to-one learning solutions are putting pressure on traditional front-of-class interactive display products. Now, if we look at the 16% overall growth, this was really due to the strong mobile PC market, which increased by 17%, and the displays market, which increased by 19%. The only category dropping, complementary devices, reduced by 13%, which is a trend that we've been forecasting and we really expect to continue as these products are generally consumed by multi-purpose computing products. However, even in these areas, there's some strong niche areas. So the voting in North American university market is still strong, so it's continued to be, and some of the visualizer sales in Germany and other European countries. We forecast that overall growth this year will be about 4%, followed by a couple of relatively flat years before increasing again in 2018. Now, while we expect to see extremely strong growth in volumes in mobile PCs, we do expect value growth to be lower due to strong pricing pressures. We're expected to see more sub-$200 PCs and Chromebooks, for example, entering the market in the second half of 2015. Now onto my second chart, and this breaks down the three product types. And as you can see, the mobile PC accounted for 63% of the total market, 9.4 billion, of which tablets took the largest share, followed by notebooks, Chromebooks and netbooks. The classroom display market is just over a third of the total, valued at $5.2 billion. And of this, projectors accounted for about half of the total. Many were just standard projectors sold with an interactive whiteboard. And the interactive projector side of it accounted for 9%. So if you look at the interactive whiteboard and interactive flat panel together, it's about 40% of the whole. Within the complementary devices, it's only 2%, but the largest of these is the visualizer market, followed by the voting systems and voice amplification. If we look at the third slide, and we're looking at the total market, look at interactive whiteboards and interactive flat panel. And whilst these product areas are under pressure from one-to-one learning solutions, the overall market still remains very healthy at 1.3 million units. Interestingly, the level of adoption continues to vary enormously country by country or region by region. But the overall market is proving resilient, and the 19% increase in value shows this. A lot of the extra increase is in fact due to the sharp transition from IWBs to IFPDs, which are obviously a more expensive product. Overall, the volumes reduce slightly. Now, in our forecast, the following years will remain relatively stable, but value will reduce as displays will continue to reduce in cost. 2017 is expected to see an overall drop in the market, and this is mainly because of the major Turkish tender, the Fatih tender, will be finished by then, and some of the huge volumes in China will be reducing because of classroom penetration rates. But still, in 5 years' time, we're expecting over 1 million displays to be sold. And there are really three key factors that are keeping the market demand. One is the move to interactive flat panels. The secondly is the replacement market, and in some countries, US, UK, that have been developed for quite a few years now, replacement market is coming along fast. And the third is the corporate meeting room space. We'll talk a little bit about this later. If we look at the fourth slide, it looks at the three main interactive technologies. And as you can see, the adoption rates, are moving very quickly for these products. We track this in 67 countries, and every country looks different. IWBs have traditionally been the anchor point for technology in the classroom, and in 2013 there were almost 1 million IWBs sold, which at the time was 6 times the number of IFPDs. But what has happened over the last year is the astonishing speed and growth of the IFPD market. And users are transitioning to flat panels. There are a few obvious benefits: the higher brightness, the single solution, meaning there's no shadowing issues, there's no projectors to replace, and also the perception of being far more modern as a product. And the final one, if there is that the total cost of ownership is reduced, so if the school is looking on a long term, then it's definitely a lower cost product. And in the UK, virtually all the replacement sales are IFPDs. Very few people are replacing with an interactive whiteboard. IFPD sales will accelerate as the costs reduce. We see this as a major factor. The Fatih tender in Turkey it's hastening this, and it's contributing to the major spike in sales in 2014, 15, 16. If you look at some of the advanced countries, if you look at Netherlands, then almost 70% of sales are IFPDs, and in UK it's 60%. But if you look at other countries at the other end of scale, then there are huge opportunities here. For instance, in US, in Germany, even in Sweden, then it's less than 20% of the sales are IFPDs. So we do expect major growth in these areas and more major focus. On the bottom of the graph, it's the interactive projectors. They are starting to gain traction, entry-level solution. Not as dramatic growth as other products, but they can be seen as being very flexible and can obviously show a larger screen. Now, what I'd like to do now is to hand over to Mike, who will talk through the developments in computing.
Thank you, Colin. Good morning or afternoon, everybody. So I want to have a look into what is taking place in computing and what we're seeing on a global level. So I think, first of all, before we start looking at kind of market sizing and market forecasting, I think it's important to put into perspective the actual market opportunity we're talking about. So to put things into context, there's 1.5 billion students and teachers in K-12 globally. It's obviously a huge number. And existing global penetration, we work out at only 5%. So with all the things that we see going on, and we're going to talk about them moving forward, we still see an absolutely huge opportunity moving forward for growth. And of course, if you're a provider of platforms, contents, software, whatever it may be, then obviously this all anchors off the actual PCs getting into the hands and digitizing in the classroom. Before we look at the penetration of PCs, I think it's quite interesting to look at the sort of traditional technology solution, the interactive display, and where that is up to in terms of classroom penetration and what we see from a geographic point of view. Just while we're kind of bringing that up, certainly one of the things we see is the leading countries in terms of interactive display penetration it's North America, it's Europe, and as Colin mentioned, it's actually China. And it's quite interesting when we start comparing that with what's happening with one-to-one learning and PCs. So North America and Europe are again relatively interesting. North America especially and especially the US market, is the driver behind PCs. China, to date, we have seen very limited adoption of one-to-one learning. There is very much a focus at the moment of front-of-class opportunities, as Colin mentioned, and there's only real very basic trials in one-to-one learning at this moment in time. I think let's take a look at the US market and the North American market, and you'll see, existing penetration is 36%. And just to be clear what I mean with that and what I'm showing on the chart, there's 67 million students and teachers in the North American market. We work out that there's an install base of PCs of 24.4 million units, and that means that there's a penetration of 36%. So 36% of students and teachers have access to their own device in schools. Now, obviously, there's some core drivers that are pushing the North American market along, especially the US market. So we've seen the transition to a Common Core and obviously the digital assessments that go alongside that. And that is obviously one of the key drivers that's really pushed the market along. Districts have had to have a plan in place to basically be able to access those digital assessments, so they've had to have PCs in place. outside of North America, unlike the sort of interactive display side of things, Europe is actually lagging a little bit. Now, there's a few reasons for that. I mean, one of the core reasons we see is that the European market is more fragmented. In a lot of the major countries in Europe, we see a school-by-school decision-making structure as opposed to a sort of district-level or state-level decision-making structure. There are some exceptions to that, places like Spain and Italy especially, and also Germany. But many of the more developed sort of Northern European markets at the moment, or more mature markets, are school-by-school based decision making. So things are moving a little bit slower. We are seeing some sort of reasonable sized projects in France, Italy and Spain, but in sort of UK, Scandinavia, it's all school by school and it's kind of accelerating gradually. I think the really interesting area when you look across the world, and this may surprise some people, is the rapid developments we see in Latin America, and I'll talk a little bit more and show you some of the examples we're seeing. But basically in Latin America we really didn't see that much uptake in interactive displays to date. There's been a couple of big projects like Enciclomedia in Mexico, but we are seeing a host of one-to-one projects, and that's really where we see governments understanding that EdTech usage can help them to influence the workforce of the future. So they're starting to sort of understand that they can bring IT skills into schools, they can be utilized, and that can help bring forward a more sort of IT savvy, more high-tech workforce that can help the country's economies moving forward. So let's take a look. So I wanted to dig into just actually some of the actual overall market sizing. So this is the number of PCs and tablets shipped globally, shipped from vendors to the market. So we've seen in 2014 the market reached 26.6 million units, up about 15% on 2013. It's a really strong performance, and I think you have to bear in mind the actual overall PC tablet market is relatively flat when you look at kind of consumer sales and everything built in. Breaking it down, you can see I think the most interesting area is obviously that North American area, a growth of from 6.9 million units to 9.6 million units in 2014, really staggering growth. We've seen the explosion of Chromebook, which I'm going to touch on a little bit more, but that's really driven by that digital assessment side. I think moving forward we do expect further growth, but not certainly at the same rate that we've seen to date. The reasons why we expect further growth is there's still a lot of districts that have got to actually implement their plans for digitization and for digital assessments. And then also over the last year we've seen a big range of new devices come to the market. We've seen two-in-one detachable products, two-in-one convertible products, a lot of vendors launching more education-specific SKUs that are more rugged and have more education-focused features. We think that wide range of choice, wide range of price points that are on the market will basically help to keep the replacement market going for some of those districts that have purchased already in place. In terms of the other regions, a couple of points to note. So you see the EMEA territory had a reasonable year in 2014. Nothing explosive, but the market is growing steadily, rolling out, and will continue to do so. The South American market, you'll see very, very strong growth. Strong growth there. There's some big national programs that have been rolling out. Looking out to 2015 and 2016, you may be questioning why we have the forecast around about the same. There's a couple of big projects that we're forecasting, we know and think likely are going to happen this year. We haven't got the site yet of them in 2016, so that's maybe a slightly conservative forecast rolling out, but you can see that it's sort of fast growth coming through in the marketplace, certainly in 2015. So we've talked about one-to-one and the fact that we're seeing a lot of developments, in a rapid sense. I touched on the fact that we're seeing more and more governments understanding the role that EdTech can play, and I think this next chart really, really highlights it. So we've just put on a chart basically the countries around the world where we've seen either national or state-level projects of reasonable size for one-to-one deployments. Now, what do I mean by kind of reasonable size? I'm not talking about school-level deployments here. So any country like the UK, Scandinavian countries where schools buy on their own for 1,000 units here, 2,000 units here, that isn't shown on here. These deployments are either state-level, national level, 20, 30,000 unit kind of deals and upwards. So all of these countries rolled out. Couple of interesting figures for you. There were 7 countries with more than 500,000, with deployments of more than 500,000 units. So real significant projects of scale. If you're a LMS provider, platform provider, content provider, you know there's a target universe there for you to hit. Those countries that rolled out in 2014 more than 500,000 units in one project were Colombia, Thailand, India, Argentina, Uruguay, Mexico, and Venezuela. So some really, really interesting countries. Some really, really interesting countries that were taking place. I think the other thing I'd point out is when you look at that list, there are probably some surprising countries that are in there. So one of the things we're definitely seeing is education. It goes down to, does the government believe in it? Is there money there to invest? And generally, if the government believes that it's something they want to invest in, they can find money at a national level or state level to invest in some of these projects. If I move forward into what we expect to see in 2015, then you'll probably see some really interesting countries popping up. So these are countries highlighted in yellow where we're seeing new projects develop in 2015. It's just coming through on the builds. There we go. Now, these are not all confirmed. These are some of the projects where we're hearing rumors, we're hearing rumblings. Some of them, like for example Kenya, I'm definitely not putting my house on or my mortgage on. It's a project that's been kicking around for a while. Anybody who knows about that project, I think is probably chuckling or shaking their head with me, but you know what I'm talking about. But just have a look at Latin America. So the amount of projects that we see in Latin America at the moment is incredible. Some of these are incredibly sizable. So I mentioned Venezuela, I mentioned already Argentina, big volumes in Brazil. There are other million-unit projects that are being discussed in Latin America at this time, and quite a few 100,000-unit type projects that are taking place and are being discussed as well. Also, I would highlight Africa. So Africa is an area that we're starting to see a lot more discussion about. I think it's still quite early days. Again, not putting the mortgage on many of these deals, but it's interesting. We've seen the Brazilian PC vendor Positivo open a factory in Rwanda basically to service projects in Africa, and we are hearing more and more about potential projects coming through. Some of these funded by international money, United Nations funds, for example. Some of them funded internally. So Nigeria has some interesting things going on at the moment, although the political situation is a little bit difficult. They have a big corporation tax which is being sort of stockpiled for education development. So lots of projects that are out there, lots of potential new developments, and generally from our point of view we see this as a real good sign that governments are understanding the developments in EdTech and how things can be utilized moving forward. So I wanted to move past some of the country things and talk a little bit about the products and what we see on this. I think if you were to summarize 2014, one of the biggest things we would look at from a hardware perspective has certainly been the explosion of Chromebooks in North America. So you'll see on the chart, down the left-hand chart, Chromebooks have gone from a 16% share to a 42% market-leading share in North American market in 2014. So Chromebooks have overtaken iPad as the sort of best type of product being sold, although Apple, it has to be said, is still the leading brand, single brand in the North American market. We've actually seen iPad sales decline as a result in the US market in 2014. So what are the combination of factors that have driven this growth? There's been a few. Certainly timing has been good. There's been no question of that. It's the move towards Common Core, the move towards online assessment, and Chromebooks have come at a price point under $300, a nice competitive price point, for a product that fits well at a time when districts are having to move pretty quickly to get products to be able to sit those digital assessments. That's definitely been a factor, there's no question. But past that, you have obviously the Google Apps ecosystem. It's relatively simple to use, works together, fits together, it's easy to pick up, and especially for districts that are developing their first one-to-one program, the Google Apps ecosystem does have a lot of merit. I think one of the other big issues that we've seen, and certainly this is a discussion we've had time and time again in the US market especially, the issue of manageability. So if you are rolling out 20,000 devices, how you provision them, how you download apps, how you manage sending out the content, the security permissions, and then how you control them, making sure that every student has the same devices, all of those issues is absolutely key. And at this moment in time, that is where Chromebooks have really sort of gained a march on some of the rivals, and I'd say especially iPad sales. That's certainly an area where Chromebooks are working well with the cloud ecosystem that goes behind them and the rollout solutions that are there. So the next question would then say, well, why has Chromebook not had the same success outside of North America? What's happening there? And I'll come on to that shortly. But first of all, I just want to touch on some of the other moves we've seen in terms of device types outside of North America. So you'll see, I'll point your sort of interest towards South America and Asia Pac and the massive growth in tablets. So we've seen really strong tablet growth in some of those countries, and definitely a trend we've seen is a lot of countries with their first large-scale national or state-level project. A lot of those are moving tablet. So the kind of big projects that have influenced those growth in South America and Asia Pac are, in South America there was a big deal in Colombia, and in Asia Pac there was a big deal in Thailand that influenced the market. A lot of those projects are Android based, as you can imagine. We still see iPads having a very strong position in a lot of the kind of more mature markets, so especially in a lot of sort of Western European markets, Apple iPad is still a very strong player, typically the market leader. But we are beginning to see, as more and more countries come on board, we see more and more kind of state-level tenders. We are seeing kind of local brands entering into the market more. We're also seeing more and more sort of Chinese OEM vendors coming into the market and winning projects in various countries around the market, and it's definitely getting more competitive. So in terms of Chrome outside of North America, why haven't we seen the same hockey stick growth outside of North America? So up till now, I mean, Chrome hasn't launched in quite a lot of countries around the world. It's just starting to launch in many others. The main focus to date has been really North Europe, so the UK, Scandinavia, Benelux being the main kind of areas. And penetration is growing steadily in those countries, somewhere between sort of 10 to 15% of notebook sales are now, sort of the notebook market are now Chromebook. But in terms of some of the core arguments about Chrome, so if you look at the manageability argument, in the US you've got a lot of districts now buying 10, 20,000 units, big scale units. In these countries, school by school level decision making, they're buying 800, 1,000 units at a time, maybe 2,000 units at a time. And those manageability arguments, while still there, they're maybe not quite as strong as if you're rolling out on a bigger scale. I think as well you don't have that overarching driver that you have in the US towards digital online assessment in such a sort of specific and timely manner that you've had in the US. That means there has to be things done, and obviously the pricing pressures for some of the districts were quite significant. Obviously in emerging markets, infrastructure is an issue, so and also in developed markets as well. So obviously a cloud-based network solution, you need obviously a strong infrastructure for the solutions to actually work. Clearly, when we look at kind of Chrome adoption in emerging markets, we are generally expecting to see success if there's kind of national level deals in some markets. So we've seen, for example, in Malaysia there was a deal that was instigated. Samsung and Acer, from a Chromebook point of view, won about 120,000 units. The national government was working with a national telecommunication company looking at a rollout. That project is since halted and is kind of being kicked around at the moment, and budgets are being discussed, and we'll sort of see how that rolls out. It's something that still potentially could happen, but at the moment is a little bit quiet. But it's that kind of national deal that we expect to see maybe in the future, the sort of future of Chrome in a lot of these emerging markets. Will the government invest in infrastructure, work with their telecommunication providers to make sure they've got the connectivity that schools need moving forward? So we've talked about the hardware side of things quite a lot, and some of the market performance. I wanted to change tack a little bit and focus on the ecosystem side of things and some of the developments we've actually seen here, and specifically the area of classroom collaboration. So classroom collaboration is an area that whenever we go to trade shows, whenever you look at product launches, there's so many solutions out there offering classroom collaboration. But classroom collaboration means different things to different people. And this is an area that for us is really interesting, because at the end of it, when you look at software solutions, when you look at productivity and what EdTech is trying to do, classroom collaboration is obviously quite front and center to what teachers are trying to do, control their class, manage their class, and basically help, with the help of technology, drive sort of collaboration in the classroom. If you break collaboration down, and you can look at many different facets of it, I would say there's kind of, I suppose, 4 or 5 obvious things. I mean, within the classroom, you obviously have the issues of the device management. How do you manage devices? How do you provision them? How do you control them? How do you make sure Johnny isn't watching or playing Angry Birds or watching YouTube when you want him to be doing an assignment? That's obviously, it's not collaboration, but it's obviously a key part of the classroom kind of management side of things. You have to work out how you want content to be distributed to students. So how do you get content to the students, whether that's an app, whether that's just pushing your assignment to the students. You then have the collaboration part of it, and that will come on to, but that means a lot of different things to different people. You then have some form of student response, so we see a lot of question and answer based solutions on the market now in various different guises, and generally there's some kind of link opportunity between student and teachers, whether it's the student being able to just send a quick message to the teacher saying, I don't quite understand this, or the other way around, the teacher saying, Johnny, get off Angry Birds, you're supposed to be doing this assignment. So you have all of these different things in there, and maybe you could also add in things like roll call as well as the kind of function that's kind of coming into the classroom. But if you break it down further, you can go further and look at the different things that are being offered on the market. And so what I want to go through now is, when you look at the market and you look at who is offering solutions to the market, we see a really, really fragmented supply side, and we see a lot of companies offering the market from completely different angles. But actually what's happening is what they're offering is really beginning to blur, and it must be confusing for end users. So before I go through the actual individual type of companies that we see, if we look across the top here and you break those categories down, so okay, you've got the classroom management side, the MDM side, that's pretty straightforward. You've got the distribution side. The collaboration piece, you've got lots of different parts to this. You've got basic kind of content mirroring, where a teacher can be walking around at the back of the class with their tablet and they can show the content on their tablet on a big screen. You then got that sort of two-way, so you've got software houses now that are encouraging teachers to give control to the student, and Johnny, show me what you've done, show me your ideas, team, can you present what you've done, and it goes back and forth, that two-way. You've obviously also got sort of your traditional front of class learning tools, interactive tools, your interactive display software used on whiteboards and the like. But then in addition, you've got cloud-based productivity tools, so Google Docs, for example, Windows solutions that go in there as well, OneNote. They are all collaboration tools, but coming at it from a different angle. In the student response side, you've got very basic Q&A, so teachers just says, is that A, B, C, D? And then you've got very adaptive Q&A and very adaptive content that comes through. And on the student-teacher messaging, you've got very basic messaging, and then you've got, let's say, for example, in Google Classroom, you've got a full communication piece where you can communicate back and forth, and the same, obviously, with Windows via email. You can communicate back and forth with the teacher and go through your assessments and all those different parts. So you have a range of blurring lines. So if we take a look at who is out in the marketplace and what kind of things are they offering. The blue color I'm going to show is basically, it's a normal offering. The orange color is sometimes you see it, sometimes you don't. So you've got IT-based classroom management specialists. So they are essentially coming from the classroom control and provisioning angle. Basically get the content out, manage it, and what students can do with it. You do see some kind of instant messaging sometimes going into that. Sometimes we might start seeing some of the Q&A going in there and the content mirroring going in there as well. But certainly they're coming from a IT management kind of space. We then see various kind of collaboration-focused software houses. So DisplayNote is used a lot in the AV world with the sort of interactive displays and tablets sitting there. That allows you to distribute content, share it 2 ways, go back and forth, send out a quiz, and message the students. Interactive display specialists have obviously been transitioning their business. So traditionally it was interactive, obviously the front of class solutions. But now you see with SmartAmp, Promethean ClassFlow, they are starting to get into the kind of cloud-based productivity solutions, mixing in with the existing solutions on the market and trying to kind of offer that content mirroring and the kind of glue linking everything together with the Q&A and the messaging side of things. But if you then think of it, you've also got voting companies who've made a business out of the whole student response side. But then if you take a look at the productivity providers, especially I think Google, you look at what Google's doing. Google has a mobile device management side, classroom management side, content distribution, they have the productivity side, and messaging and communication. So there's just a real blur there between the different types of approaches to collaboration. And then finally, what you're seeing now with a lot of the publishers, you're seeing a lot of publishers out there basically offering their platform they have in there, whatever their platform is that they're sort of showing the digital content. A lot of them now will have then the distribution tool to allow the teacher to send that to the child and send it into groups. It will then have Q&A again built into that, messaging built into that. So you have a really confusing collaboration angle within schools. And I think for those of you listening who are in this space, I suppose one of the things that we're thinking as well is, whilst if you're an AV provider or someone in the AV space, you wouldn't necessarily think you are in any way competing with a Google or Microsoft. But if you actually look at the functionality of what we're talking about collaboration, there is real blur. Now certainly from an end user point of view, we understand this causes confusion, it's causing problems, sometimes can slow things down, so many options on the marketplace. And certainly as we see more and more money being poured into the industry from the VC industry, so there was $1.4 billion spent by VC houses in the US on US EdTech startups last year, 2014, a phenomenal amount of money. And that's great news, but what it is obviously seeing is still more and more startups coming to the market, a lot of small companies. We're still seeing a very, very fragmented ecosystem out there, and obviously that's pretty difficult from an end user point of view. So to conclude, and we'll move on to questions shortly, we're seeing a very, very positive outlet for EdTech deployment globally. We touched on some of the numbers. We've seen the spend of all the hardware categories that we track jumping up to 14.9 billion from 12.9 billion. We definitely are seeing interest in EdTech spread across the world. It's not just US, UK and some of the majors. We're seeing big projects in many countries across the world. We are seeing an increasing maturity and understanding of infrastructural issues, content issues, how you use technology in the marketplace. Less and less projects, although they do still exist, we're seeing less and less projects out there where someone just stands up and waves a bit of hardware around and says, hey, look what I'm doing, this is EdTech, without understanding actually how do I use this device, how does it improve learning outcomes. Moving forward, we do still see gaps in the ecosystem, that's clear. I think we talked about the collaboration side. I think content curation is another area that we still see gaps in the industry. So it's still very difficult for teachers to find good content. There's tons of good content out there, but if you're trying to find that science lesson that fits your needs, it's not easy. Certainly as well, when we look at a global level, with the localized nature of this industry, the education market, there are gaps in that side of things moving forward. So at this point I'm going to pass you back to James. I think James is just going to talk you through a few bits. We're going to have a look at a couple of questions and then we'll take some questions from there.
Thank you, Mike. Some interesting market movements described there. We have a number of questions which will allow us to delve deeper into the detail. If any of you have any additional questions, you can use your keypad to get through. While our presenters are running through the questions list, I'd just like to let you know that much of the information you have seen today has been taken from our forthcoming report, Universe of Education Spend, which will be released by the end of the month. Mike, would you just like to give us an overview of this?
Yes, thanks, James. So just a quick overview. This is a report. It's, as James said, it's going to be due in the next couple of weeks. This is a kind of summary report that pulls information from a range of our different services. It looks kind of globally and then regionally, EMEA, Americas, Asia. We do have more detail and country level than that, but this is specifically kind of targeted at a sort of top level view. It covers all of the 14 products we've talked about today, what we're seeing in terms of adoption of those products, volume, value, penetration, brand shares, and some of the specific specification, analysis, and forecasts for those categories. It also looks into some of the issues in the marketplace, so some of the other things we haven't touched on today, some of the things about data privacy we've not seen, the movements in vocational learning and coding around the world. But then also one of the things that I'm sure is interesting for many, so I showed you some of the projects and tenders and investments we're tracking around the world. We have write-ups on those, you know, what they are, what's the detail behind them, what's happening, what kind of scale are they taking place, do we think they're likely to happen or not. And we've got about 30 countries covered in that side of things as well. So it's a good summary level for anybody who's especially looking at kind of where things are moving around the world, what technology products are winning and losing. Then this report is a great report for you. So if you've got any interest in this thing, then please obviously let us know, and we'll be happy to send you some more information and take it on from there. James.
Right guys, I think we're now ready to answer some of your questions, so let's dive in there. One for you, Mike.
So we've been asked about connectivity. So what do we see going on about connectivity? Really good question. So connectivity is an area of the market that we see is obviously absolutely fundamental. It feels a bit silly saying that, but over the last year we've seen a lot more discussion about connectivity. And I think sometimes you sort of sit and say connectivity is an issue in emerging markets. Well, that's not the case. Connectivity is an issue everywhere. I mean, it's been interesting watching in the US market. The feedback that we've had is the usage, demand, and the pressures being undertaken on the pipes that exist in many schools, many districts, is just growing exponentially, and many infrastructures or many existing infrastructures just cannot cope. And many districts that have put networks in 3-4 years ago are having to look at, do they try and cap those can't cap the networks, or do they actually have to rip things up and start again and put new technology in, because the level of demand on them is just growing with more and more devices coming to market, and then more and more video, more and more as the market matures, we're seeing obviously much more consumption of content coming through. I think certainly when we look at emerging markets, especially our countries where the infrastructure is in place is not so good, that's where things get really interesting. We have been for the last couple of years hearing a lot of rumors about telecommunication companies looking at should they be offering data packages to schools. Okay, sorry, I thought we lost the audio then. So telecommunication companies talking about whether they should be offering data packages to schools and going in and basically essentially offering a solution as you would see they do with your mobile phone contract. But one of the issues has been is the rate of adoption and the growth in the bandwidth consumed is growing so fast, people are not sure where to pitch the business model. So that's an area that we're kind of keeping an eye on. We haven't seen too many movements yet, but it's something we're kind of watching. Certainly in emerging markets, we are seeing more and more discussions between governments and telecommunication providers about kind of going in different kind of deals. So we've seen in Colombia, the example I mentioned earlier, some of the devices that were being deployed there were part of a 4G auction that was taking place in Colombia. We've also seen something similar take place, albeit not the same project, but in Portugal a few years ago, in 2008, there was a national project where 1.8 million netbooks got deployed to schools. So every single student in K-12 in Portugal got a device. And what the government actually did was they went to, at the time of the 3G auction in Portugal, there was the funding in place. The government did a deal with the telco companies. Telco companies put up some of the money for the devices together with the government. But the kicker was parents had to subscribe for 3 years to the telco services at home. And so basically the telco company obviously gets subscriptions, they get increased traffic at home and through the country, and in return basically the national infrastructure of Portugal was improved and developed. So there's some interesting things going on in terms of telco involvement. That's something we expect to happen and more moving forward, and connectivity will be a key issue moving forward certainly.
Thank you, Mike. Some interesting information there. And now one for you, Colin. I've seen the launch of the Microsoft Surface Hub, and someone would like to know what impact will this product have?
Yeah, thanks, James. And I can see we've actually got quite a few questions stacking up, so we probably won't have time to answer all of them, but rest assured we will get back to each of you after the call. Surface Hub. Now, this was officially launched at ISE a few weeks ago, and if any of you missed it, it was Microsoft's first ever interactive flat panel displays. It's available in two sizes, 55 and 84 inch. No launch date but expected this summer. And from what we hear, that the demonstration were very popular, and the feedback was that the product works extremely well and is very simple to operate. And this has often been a criticism from other interactive displays. Now, we don't see this product directly competing for, within the education market for the vendors within education. Microsoft obviously own the Office territory, and they want to get hardware moving very badly. And so they see this as an opportunity. But penetration of interactive displays in corporates is very, very low. I mean, from figures, it's something under 1% of the 50 million corporate meter rooms, so tiny penetration. But what we think will be critical in this is, firstly, from the Microsoft product, the pricing angle, and we expect this to be more expensive than the typical education product. But what it's going to do is raise awareness. So potentially, being a major help to all vendors to tap into this new market. And in turn, that may well impact on other markets that really haven't moved as fast. For instance, the higher education market, which is still way behind the typical K through 12 schools. Okay, so can I go back to you on this, James?
Thank you, Colin. And now one for Mike. Mike, do you see any dramatic shifts in operating systems for mobile devices aside from Chrome? Any indications on trends on Android, Windows and Apple iOS?
Thanks, James. Interesting question. Interesting timing. I'm not sure how widely known it is yet, but we understand there's been a significant change to the Shape the Future program from Microsoft. It's a little bit early stages to know yet the impact of that. I don't know enough about it quite yet to know that, but I know that essentially the program, the pricing being offered by Microsoft is changing. So my understanding is there will be as opposed to a $1 charge for Shape the Future, there will be a $10 or $15 charge depending on country, and also the range of devices that can be applied to has changed. So it's not going to be applied to every single product on the market, especially up at kind of the mid and high-end part of the market. So that is something that I believe was announced last week, and is obviously kind of quite hot news, and certainly we'd expect that to have an impact on things, but we don't know the full picture of that yet to see how that will change things. I think definitely a few of the trends we're seeing. Generally, if you look at not just iPads, but you look at Macs, Macs are generally holding share pretty well in the markets. That much is clear. I think one trend I would say is we are definitely seeing more and more demand in the markets coming through from emerging markets. So you see, for example, a lot of the growth that we see forecast in Latin America coming through from projects there. Generally, what you will then see is quite a lot of the tablet products there will obviously be Android. So we're definitely seeing kind of more and more large-scale deals for Android in emerging markets. We also do expect to see Android gaining share in the US market, especially and pre-K markets around the world. So real early stages, early years. We're starting to see some quite interesting products hit that market. People like Amplify, LearnPad, sort of targeting those kind of markets, and we do think Android solutions will gain share with that type of device. I think it's obviously interesting as well when you start seeing Google Play for Education launching in different countries around the world. So that will simplify some of the purchasing side on the Android side of things as well. We do on Windows, we do see Windows as a category in the tablet market gaining small amounts of share. At the moment it's still under 10% share for Windows in the tablet space, but we've seen a raft of devices, 2-in-1 devices, convertible type devices coming into that space from all the traditional Windows PC vendors, and we do certainly see them gaining traction around the world this year. So it's really quite localized. It's very fluid at the moment. I've touched on obviously the rise of Chrome. That has been significant. I think we were expecting a little bit of a fight back from Windows in some of the core markets this year. I don't have enough information at this moment in time to understand exactly what this shape the future change of policy is likely to mean. I think there's probably more information to come out of that will make that clear. But in general, some very interesting developments in terms of operating system.
Thank you, Mike. Another interesting bit of information there. Another one for you, though. You looked at the tender information, so I would just like to know what sources do you base your product's qualification on?
Good question. A lot of research. So anyone on this call who knows us well, you've probably been involved in some of our research. So we've got a dedicated team here researching constantly around the world. We have contacts up and down the channel. So from a vendor, OEM vendor, CPU, distributor, dealer, and government contacts. So every country around the not every country, every quarter we kind of focus on about 60 countries around the world that we look at, and whenever we pick up information about new projects that are coming through, we look to dig into it and try and understand what the status of any project is. Understand also, certainly one of the things when we look at these projects is you sometimes have to look past a lot of political bluster. Some of these projects are never going to happen. They're just somebody wanting to win an election or wanting to sort of make some kind of noise. And you can generally find that out by talking to people close to the project and saying, is there a budget in place? What are they doing on infrastructure? What are they doing about content? Is this a serious project, yes or no? So it's a range of sources, but it's basically us talking to people in country, around the world, from different sources to pick up and understand where these things are coming from.
Thank you, Mike. And now one for you, Colin. Are devices such as IWBs and IFPDs coming with software bundled, or is the trend about buying them separately?
Yeah, this is a very interesting area. I suppose if you look back to the sort of the established vendors who have been in the market perhaps sort of 10 years or so, and they've always put a great play on having standard software and pretty advanced software with their products. You look at the other end of the scale, and certainly when we saw it, at BET, a lot of the different products there last month, and many of them are coming with pretty basic, and in some cases just a sort of annotation only. So people are buying these products. They're obviously at a much lower cost, and they're quite happy. And it seems that a number of schools are happy with using this as a basic product. And then you've got the other side where you've got a sort of basic product, but it might be using more widely available software, possibly from some of the sort of existing vendors. So you really got quite a mixture of this, but it seems that it's really down to sort of the user, the expectations of the user, and certainly the people who've been using for some time are, are quite advanced users, so they don't want just a basic product, but possibly some of the sort of the new users are just using it as a, a fairly sort of straightforward annotation device at the front of the classroom.
Thank you, Colin. And one last question for Mike. You mentioned lots of countries with national one-to-one projects. Are these being serviced by ridiculously low-cost devices?
Yeah, good question. We have seen that in the past. There's no two ways about it. Probably the most famous case at the moment is in Thailand, the Thailand One Tablet Per Child project. That has now ended, and it was not very successful. The Prime Minister stood up saying we're going to give 8 million or so devices to every child as a key election pledge. There was a deal with, rumours have it, the Chinese government, and the products purchased were sort of around about the $80 mark. Surprise, surprise, about 30% of them didn't work. And there was a huge load of issues where there was a warehouse fire and all kinds of things. So that was one example where, really basically the project was a complete and utter failure. At this moment in time now, most of the things we're seeing, we are not seeing too much talk about kind of under $100 tablet projects in the marketplace. Certainly most of the things that we see, a lot of the projects we see, for example, in Latin America, we're looking more in the sort of $200, $250 kind of price point on some of those projects for tablets. The market does seem to have taken a little bit of stock on kind of what you need to do to actually have a decent learning outcomes. Obviously a lot of the kind of suppliers obviously know that, but it's always convincing the end users. So it looks like that kind of ridiculous price point pressure has moved a little bit. I think it will be interesting this year. We touched on, Colin mentioned earlier, we're expecting to see, for example, sub $200 PCs, Chromebooks by the end of the year. I think that's going to be interesting to see the uptake and usage and how well they do. We've seen, for example, the announcement of HP Stream type products that's had some success already in certain states in the US market. So what's the feedback and adoption on those types of products moving forward? But at this moment in time, it doesn't look like it's a race towards the $100 and under market. And certainly I think we are seeing more and more of these emerging markets genuinely talking about connectivity infrastructure and understanding what they need to do with content as well, rather than just kind of focusing on the device, which is obviously has been a big issue in the past.
Unfortunately, that's all we have time for today. A big thank you to Mike and to Colin and to everyone that attended today. We've had a few questions we didn't get time to address, so the team will be getting in touch with you to answer those questions offline. Just a quick reminder, we will be sending you a cut down version of the slides early next week. Thank you very much for attending. Goodbye.